I want you to stop scrolling for 1 second, because what just played out between the United States and Canada is not the trade story you think it is. It is not a tariff dispute. It is not a diplomatic speed bump that gets smoothed over in the next news cycle. What just happened is the kind of moment that foreign policy analysts are going to be picking apart for years. The kind of moment that changes how every government on earth calculates what Washington's word is actually worth. And tonight, I want to walk you through all of it, the real timeline, the real strategy, and the real consequences, because the American people deserve a straight answer, not spin. But before we go any further, if you want honest, sourced analysis on the moments that actually move the world, not just the ones that trend for 48 hours, subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Because this story is being felt in every country, not just these two. Here is the central fact of this story. Donald Trump, the man who built his entire political identity around never needing anyone, never asking, never blinking, spent months applying maximum economic pressure to the United States' closest ally and largest trading partner. Tariffs, annexation threats, public insults, the 51 Street. State rhetoric. All of it was pressure. And when Trump sat down with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in the Oval Office on May 6, 2025, Carney looked him in the eye in front of the entire world's press corps and said in plain language that every trade diplomat on earth immediately understood that Canada is not for sale, not for negotiation, not under threat. The answer was no. Sit with that for a second. Now, I want to be precise about what I mean when I say this story matters, because I am not interested in scoring political points. I want you to understand the actual mechanics, the structural reason why this was not just a diplomatic awkward moment, the reason it sent signals to Beijing, Brussels, and every capital currently recalculating its relationship with Washington. And to do that properly, we need to go back to the beginning. Not for nostalgia, because the history is the only thing that explains why Carney walked into that room the way he did. The United States and Canada built the largest two-country trading relationship in the history of the world. NAFTA, signed in 1993, was the architecture. By recent years, bilateral trade was running at roughly $762 billion annually, according to the U.S. Trade Representative. Supply chains so deeply interlocked that you cannot build an American car without Canadian steel. You cannot run a Canadian energy sector without American investment. These are not talking points. These are structural economic facts that took 3 decades to build. NAFTA became USMCA in 2020, a renegotiated agreement, imperfect like all agreements, but functional. Built on the understanding that you do not detonate a 30-year partnership over short-term political positioning. That was the baseline going into 2025. Here is where things changed. Not all at once, not dramatically. The way trust always breaks slowly and then suddenly. On February 1, 2025, President Trump signed executive orders declaring a national emergency and announcing 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, officially citing fentanyl and border concerns despite the fact that, as CBS News reported, U.S. Customs seized just 43 pounds of fentanyl at the Canadian border last year, compared to over 21,000 pounds at the southern border. The tariffs took effect March 4, 2025, after a brief 30-day pause. Canada retaliated immediately with roughly $30 billion in counter tariffs on American goods. And then the language started, the 51 Street state rhetoric. The suggestion that Canada was somehow taking advantage of the United States, that this partnership was actually a bad deal, that Washington's closest ally was, in effect, a problem to be solved. Canada heard all of it. Canada remembered. All of it. Let me tell you exactly what happened on May 6, 2025, because this is where facts matter more than framing. Trump and Carney met face-to-face in the Oval Office, the first meeting since Carney's Liberal Party won the Canadian federal election on April 28, an election that Carney ran and won almost entirely on a platform of standing up to U.S. pressure. Before Carney even arrived, Trump posted on Truth Social, "We don't need their cars, we don't need their energy, we don't need their lumber, we don't need anything they have." In the room, Trump said there was nothing Carney could offer that would lift tariffs that day. Carney, a man who ran the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, who has navigated global financial crises, looked at the most powerful head of state on earth and said on camera that Canada is not for sale, won't be for sale ever. He said it once. Then he said it again. Trump's response: never say never. The answer from Canada was no, not hostile. Not panicked. Just know that moment was broadcast live to every government on earth. Here is the thing that does not make headlines as easily as dramatic exchange clips, but matters just as much. Maybe more. Here is the strategic logic that broke down. When you apply maximum pressure to an ally, you are making a specific bet. The bet is that their need for the relationship outweighs their need for self-respect. That calculation works sometimes. It works when the other side believes that backing down is politically survivable at home. But here is what Trump's months of annexation rhetoric, 51st state jokes, and public insults actually did to that calculation. Every Canadian who heard their national identity treated like a bargaining chip did not become more likely to accept a deal. They became Carney's political base. Trump did not just apply pressure to Canada. He handed Carney a mandate. Carney did not say no despite the political risk at home. He said no because of the political strength those months of insults had accidentally given him. You can win a tariff argument and lose the entire negotiating position at the same time. That is what happened here. Now let me ask the question that needs to be asked, even though asking it makes some people uncomfortable. Who benefits from this outcome? Not politically strategically. When the United States applies maximum pressure to its closest ally, gets a public rejection on camera, and has no immediate path to resolution, there are actors in this world who watch that happen and see opportunity. China has spent years trying to convince developing nations that American leadership is unreliable. On May 6, 2025, they got a perfect case study delivered to them at no cost. Russia watches NATO unity strain under the weight of an unpredictable Washington and files it away. Every government currently deciding whether to align more tightly with American institutions or begin exploring alternatives just watched Canada, a country that shares a 5,500-mile border with the United States, declare publicly that the current relationship needs fundamental repair before business can continue. That signal did not stay in Ottawa. It traveled. Let me walk you through where this actually goes from here, because there are 4 realistic paths and only one of them ends well for the United States. Scenario 1, the best case. The administration quietly reduces the most aggressive tariffs. Canada re-engages after seeing enough de-escalation to make dialogue politically safe for Carney at home. A new framework gets negotiated under the U.S review process, which is already scheduled. Markets stabilize, the supply chains that cracked get rebuilt. American farmers and manufacturers who got caught in the crossfire get some relief. That is the best case. But even that scenario requires something this strategy has not yet demonstrated: the ability to give ground without announcing it as a victory and without cornering the other side into a position where, yes, looks like surrender. Scenario 2, the most likely if nothing changes. A long economic standoff that slowly damages both sides. The tariffs stay, Canada's retaliatory measures stay. American businesses that depend on North American supply chains keep absorbing costs that eventually move to consumers. Canadian businesses adapt slowly, painfully finding alternative markets in Europe, in Southeast Asia, in places that were previously secondary relationships. And here is the part that should concern every American regardless of party. Canada is very good at finding alternative relationships when it has to every Canadian export dollar that flows toward Europe or Asia instead of the United States is a dollar of leverage Washington gives up voluntarily. Scenario 3, regional fracture. The moment Canada said no publicly, every G7 member updated their internal analysis of Washington. European allies are already managing their own tariff disputes with this administration. Japan is watching. South Korea is watching. If the image that forms in allied capitals is that the United States applies maximum pressure, gets publicly rejected, and has no clear path to resolution, then the coalition of democratic nations that anchored global stability for 80 years starts developing cracks that bad actors will absolutely exploit. This is how the post-war order actually fractures, not in one dramatic moment, in 100 quiet recalculations. Scenario for the one that concerns me most: long-term strategic repositioning. Canada begins methodically reducing its dependence on American markets. Not dramatically, not angrily, systematically diversifying trade relationships, building alternative supply chains, investing in domestic capacity for sectors where American supply was previously taken for granted. And once that process starts, it is very hard to stop, even if every tariff gets lifted tomorrow. A weakened relationship with Canada does not just cost the United States economically. It costs the model. Because if Canada, culturally closest to us, historically most aligned, geographically tied to U.S., successfully demonstrates that reducing dependence on Washington is both survivable and strategically smart, then that example is visible to every other country making similar calculations. You can win a tariff argument and lose the structure of American influence at the same time. I want to come back to something before we close, because I think it matters more than any of the geopolitical analysis. There are American workers right now who are caught in the middle of this. Auto workers in Michigan and Ohio whose production lines run on Canadian parts now subject to 25% tariffs, dairy farmers in Wisconsin, who built their businesses on Canadian market access and are watching those markets close. Small manufacturers who never thought about trade policy in their lives because it never affected them, who are now learning the very hard way what the difference is between tariff theory and tariff reality. These are not abstractions. These are people. They did not cause this situation. They did not choose this situation. They are living inside it. Whatever your view is on the decisions that led here, the human cost of strategic miscalculation is real and it is immediate. The worker in Toledo who cannot get a clear answer about whether his plant absorbs the cost or cuts his hours, the farmer in Minnesota who planted his crop on market expectations that no longer exist, the small business owner who signed a supply contract 6 months ago that now puts her underwater. They deserve better than this. Here is what the moment demands. Congress needs to do its job. Trade authority in this country constitutionally goes through Congress. The tariffs disrupting North American supply chains were imposed using executive emergency authority that Congress has the legal power to constrain. The House has already passed a resolution, 219 to 211, pushing back on tariffs against Canada. The Senate has not moved. That matters. It matters because trade policy that lasts, trade policy that actually protects American workers and businesses over time, cannot be built on executive personality alone. The administration needs to tell the American people what success looks like in specific, measurable terms. What does Canada have to do? What does the United States offer in return? What is the framework? Because pressure without a framework is not negotiation. It is just pressure. And the American people deserve to know what the end state actually is. The workers and farmers caught in the crossfire deserve a trade policy built on strategy, not on the politics of the moment. Here is what I believe, and I believe it not as analysis, but as a basic observation about how power actually works in the world. There is a difference between strength and the performance of strength. Real strength, the kind that actually moves history, is not about who blinks first or who sounds toughest in front of a camera. Real strength is building relationships that are durable enough to survive disagreement. Real strength is having a strategy that outlasts a single news cycle. Real strength is the kind of power that grows over decades because the people and countries you need are genuinely with you, not quietly looking for the exit. Canada just sent the United States a message, not about Canada, about how America looks from the outside right now, about the gap between how we see ourselves and how we are being seen. The question is whether anyone in that building on Pennsylvania Avenue is listening and asking not who won the moment, but what does this mean for the next 10 years? Because the next 10 years of North American economic integration, of allied unity, of American leadership credibility are being shaped right now by decisions being made right now. Getting this right is not optional. We owe it to the workers caught in the middle. We owe it to the allies watching from a distance. We owe it to the institutions that generations of Americans built so that no president would ever have to choose between pressure and partnership, and no country would ever have to choose between dignity and a deal. Let us get this right. If this analysis gave you something real to think about, like it, share it, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, do you think a deal gets done or does this standoff last? I want to hear from you. Thank you for watching.